ask a question with one follow-up question.
So you mentioned in the beginning of your argument, you started off by saying in general you would support this. But the question specifically asks about particular conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think team over here did mention a few specific conditions, and I wondered if you could either elaborate on the conditions that they suggested where it would be justifiable, or possibly suggest some of your own specific conditions under which it would be justifiable.
So what we did mention in our positive case, and again in the objections, is in order to incentivize it, we would recommend these vouchers as a party payment option. And those are vouchers, scholarships for education in the area, vouchers for housing in the area, or donations to charities of the donor's choice. And again, this is specifically to head off any corruption that may come from the donation process, if that were to happen.
And yeah, we talked about the replenishment thing in the thesis, and that was just to kind of give a little teaser of what we were going to be talking about in our case. But like Justin's talking about, the vouchers that we would want to provide as incentives for people to be more proactive about selling their bone marrow and having that bone marrow kind of available for people who need it. We'd like to stress the voucher as opposed to just like a direct cash payment. So that would be, I guess that would be one of our conditions, that the compensation that people who are selling their bone marrow would be in the form of vouchers that would go to some form of charity or educational pursuits kind of thing, as opposed to like a direct cash payment where you can just go out and buy anything you want with that, which would create an incentive, like we talked about, for people to not give totally accurate information when selling their bone marrow.
Furthermore, if someone was worried about playing the system or just repeatedly doing this over and over again, that there is a time that a bone marrow takes to replenish itself, so that would be part of the layover, as well as maybe instituting something longer than that to ensure that no one abuses the incentivized program.
Yeah, so even if you do have controls, I assume there would be controls on how often somebody would contribute. But I guess what I didn't see was an argument, and asking you to give this, an argument for or against for profit. So you're only going to get a lot of the altruists contributing bone marrow. There's part of the population that maybe is less altruistic, but you would get bone marrow from them with a big enough cash payment. And even if you had controls over over who would get the bone marrow. But what's your argument against just giving people a bunch of cash to do it because it didn't hurt them and it helped the people receiving it?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I believe your concern is as to how we didn't make a condition which would stipulate that persons would not be able to profit from this. I think we counteract this in that we use the example of, and we only exemplified nonprofit organizations doing this, in that they're not for profit, and also secondly, in that they're being not for profit.
Yeah. So the organization that would kind of oversee this process, we think should be not for profit. The individuals selling their bone marrow would of course profit for it in the form of these vouchers, and kind of like in the same vein that we were explaining earlier, just like a straight cash payment might provide incentive for people to not be as forthright as they could be, like as far as like pre-existing medical conditions or things like that. So certain tests that maybe they would not have to undergo. We think that a direct cash payment would be an incentive for people who might not have the right intentions and even more so the right kind of bone marrow that the people who need the bone marrow need, and might be subpar and adversely affect those who need the bone marrow.
And also, if you're taking a utilitarian perspective, as we mentioned earlier, we don't want to disenfranchise persons from lower income backgrounds, in that they would not be able to purchase the bone marrow. So using the organizational party payment, they go ahead and uses makes accessible governmental grants as well as private donations that that the nonprofits and other organizations can accrue in order to compensate the persons, as well as pay for the expensive process it takes in the extraction of bone marrow as well. So that's something that we had often an idea that if we were to have for-profit institutions or organizations and with the bone marrow donations, it would disenfranchise certain groups that come from a lower income background. And that's why we would say as a particular condition, as we did address that, we stressed that we stressed and used only examples of nonprofit organizations in the form of the more marrow donors organization as well.
Did that sufficiently kind of ask?
Well, I was
you were
also asking about, I agree with you about the nonprofits.
Okay.
But, so the nonprofit would be the buffer between the people getting the cash payment and the, so the people getting the bone marrow wouldn't directly be paying, so in some sense it would be averaged out, so.
Yeah, so
what's
it
wrong
would go
there?
to the highest bidder,
Well, you wouldn't, you try to rule out the money on the buyer's end.
yeah, so you wouldn't have other groups, kind of, disenfranchised from receiving the bone marrow kind of thing. So not only the wealthiest can get the bone marrow kind of thing.
Right, so I think another aspect of your question that you asked was, why not just pay whoever's donating the money directly? Why not just give them actual money? And I think Austin touched on it, and I know we touched on it in our first objection. So again, we just don't want them to attempt to abuse it, and if they attempt to, then it's when falsified paperwork comes on. And if they are receiving large amounts of money, they could pay someone inside the company to falsify tests and things like that. So the voucher program really does head that off and attempt to make sure that the only person donating is the only one that benefits from this process.
Any follow-up questions?
Did we answer your question sufficiently that you had at the beginning?
No, not really.
Okay.
I was thinking about maybe talking about other conditions that you hadn't mentioned already. And I guess I interpret this issue or conditions as kind of scenarios that would occur for people to donate or to make payment. Different scenarios, rather than the way that you interpreted the word conditions, which is you'd set up this system to do this or something like that.
Okay.
With different kinds of scenarios, like the particular scenario mentioned in this case, I can imagine lots of other scenarios, but that's what I was thinking in terms of conditions. So what kind of conditions would it be justifiable? And maybe what kind of conditions wouldn't it be?
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if we're understanding like what kind of conditions you're looking for.
He's saying like, what would be the requisite for these people? And, if there's like how would they go about the deliberation process and decide that this person merits themselves as being a bone as having a greater need for the bone marrow? Is that what you're saying? Like what situation? Like
Situations or scenarios, or
Yeah.
good enough need. So the question is
Yeah.
about ethically justifiable, right?
Mhm.
So what conditions or what scenarios or what situations would merit that, and maybe which ones wouldn't? Where do you draw the line?
So I think what we focused on here is, as you mentioned, is incentivizing it. And with your question directly, it's talking about the people that need the bone marrow. And I think that's the same rules and regulations that apply for right now with the National Registry and how that's ranked. There isn't really an issue with that. It's finding more donors that follow through. As we stated in the positive case, I think it's roughly 47, if not higher percent, that back out. And this is because, when we go donate blood, like, oh, would you like to sign up for our registry? You say sure, but you never follow through with it. That coupled with the reasons that both teams have cited about why they don't come back and follow through. So the rules and regulations already in place are sufficient enough. It's a matter of finding more donors.
Although we didn't see that as a central moral dimension of the case, I believe the scenario would be the same as that of the public registry, and seeing that, as the amount of time that has expired, is meriting who should receive that bone. The priority for bone marrow donation, as the public registry looks at, how much time the person's been on the list and have a waiting list for people to receive bone marrow. So I think they would prioritize it based off of time or similar situations, or of dire need. If the person has been on the list for a while and it needs the bone marrow immediately in that regard too.
Yeah, I mean, I guess conditions would be like, you have to have the right kind of medical history. Can't have, any illnesses that can be, given to other people in giving your bone marrow, just like, same thing for blood, and things like that. So I guess that would be a condition. I mean, we want healthy